The October rain hammered down on Route 66 just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror that reflected the neon signs of the roadside diners and gas stations. Marcus "Bull" Henderson sat hunched over his Harley-Davidson Fat Boy in the parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop, the rain streaming off his leather vest and pooling around his boots. At 52 years old, Bull had seen more road than most people saw in a lifetime. His weathered face, marked by a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheek, told stories of bar fights, cross-country runs, and 30 years riding with the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. But tonight, Bull wasn't thinking about the road. He was thinking about his son. Jake Henderson was 17 years old, with his mother's green eyes and Bull's stubborn streak. The kid had grown up around motorcycles, around the rumble of engines and the brotherhood of leather-clad men who treated him like their own. Jake was supposed to be at home in their small house in Sedona, finishing his homework and staying out of trouble. Bull had left him there 3 days ago before heading out on a supply run to pick up parts for the club's garage. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps us keep bringing you these incredible true stories. Now, let's get back to Bull and what happened that rainy October night. Bull's phone buzzed in his vest pocket. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen through the rain. It was Manny Rodriguez, one of his brothers from the club. A shorter man with slicked-back hair and a talent for finding trouble before it found him. "Bull, you need to get back here now." Manny's voice crackled through the speaker, barely audible over the storm. "It's Jake. He's been shot." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Bull gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "What? Where is he? What hospital?" "Flagstaff Medical Center. He's in surgery. Bull, it's bad. 3 bullets. Get here." Bull didn't remember starting his bike. He didn't remember pulling out of the parking lot or merging onto the highway. The 40-minute ride back to Flagstaff blurred into a nightmare of rain and speed, his heart pounding harder than the engine beneath him. Jake was his only child, born when Bull was 35 and had finally found some stability with Sarah, a waitress who'd seen past the leather and tattoos to the man underneath. Sarah had died of cancer when Jake was 12. And since then, it had been just the two of them against the world. 3 bullets. The words kept echoing in Bull's mind. His son, his boy, shot 3 times. The hospital parking lot was crowded with motorcycles when Bull arrived, at least 15 bikes from the Iron Saints already there. His brothers stood in a tight cluster near the emergency entrance, smoking cigarettes and pacing in the rain. Tommy "Wrench" Sullivan, the club's sergeant-at-arms, stepped forward when Bull dismounted. "Second floor, surgical wing," Wrench said, his voice rough. "They won't tell us much. Family only." Bull pushed through the automatic doors, his boots squeaking on the polished linoleum. The fluorescent lights felt too bright, too sterile. A nurse at the reception desk looked up, took one look at Bull's rain-soaked leather and the Iron Saints patch on his back, and immediately picked up her phone. "I'm Marcus Henderson. My son Jake was brought in with gunshot wounds." The nurse's expression softened. "Second floor, waiting area. The doctor will find you there." Bull took the stairs 2 at a time, his chest tight with fear he hadn't felt since Sarah's diagnosis. The waiting area was small, with plastic chairs and outdated magazines scattered on a coffee table. A few other families sat in quiet clusters, their faces drawn with worry. Bull paced, unable to sit, until a doctor in green scrubs emerged from the double doors. "Mr. Henderson, that's me. How's my son?" The doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured to the chairs. "Let's sit down." "I'd rather stand. Just tell me." She nodded, understanding. "Your son suffered 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen. We've stabilized him, but he's lost a significant amount of blood. The bullets missed his heart and major arteries by millimeters. He's incredibly lucky to be alive. We're keeping him in intensive care for observation." Bull's legs finally gave out. He sat heavily in one of the plastic chairs. "Can I see him?" "Soon. He's still unconscious from the anesthesia." "Mr. Henderson, do you know what happened? The police are outside waiting to speak with you." Bull shook his head. "I was on the road. I just got the call." The doctor squeezed his shoulder before walking away, and two detectives in plain clothes approached. The older one, a man with grey hair and a tired expression, introduced himself as Detective Carlson. His partner, a younger woman with sharp eyes, was Detective Hayes. "Mr. Henderson, we need to ask you some questions about your son," Carlson said, pulling out a notepad. "Do you know why Jake was downtown this evening?" "Downtown? He was supposed to be home doing homework." Hayes pulled out her phone, showing Bull's security camera footage. "This was taken at 6:47 p.m. outside the Greyhound bus station on Milton Avenue. Do you recognize the other person in the video?" Bull leaned forward, studying the grainy footage. Jake was clearly visible, wearing his favorite grey hoodie and jeans. He was talking to a smaller figure, a kid who couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, thin and wearing clothes that were too big for his frame. The kid was backed against the wall of the bus station, and three older teenagers surrounded them both, their body language aggressive. "I don't know that kid," Bull said. "What happened?" Carlson took over. "According to witnesses, your son intervened when those three teenagers were harassing the younger boy. They demanded money. When Jake told them to back off, things escalated. One of them pulled a gun. Jake stepped in front of the younger boy, and that's when he was shot. Multiple witnesses confirmed Jake saved that kid's life." Bull stared at the frozen image on the detective's phone, his vision blurring. Of course, Jake had stepped in. The kid had grown up watching Bull and the Iron Saints help people on the road, broken-down families, stranded travelers, anyone who needed a hand. Jake had absorbed those values like breathing. Where's the kid now? The one Jake protected? Hayes exchanged a glance with Carlson. "That's the thing. He ran after the shooting. We haven't been able to locate him. No ID, no family has come forward. We think he might be homeless. We're searching, but downtown Flagstaff has a significant homeless population, especially around the bus station and the railroad yard." "And the shooters?" "In custody. All three of them. They're 16 and 17, gang affiliates. The gun was stolen. They're being charged with attempted murder, armed robbery, and a list of other charges." Bull nodded slowly, processing the information. His son had taken 3 bullets for a homeless kid he didn't even know. Pride and terror warred in his chest, making it hard to breathe. The detectives left their cards and promised to keep him updated. Bull sat in the waiting room for another hour before a nurse finally came to tell him he could see Jake. She led him through the double doors, down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, to a room at the end of the corridor. Jake lay in the hospital bed, so pale he almost blended into the white sheets. Tubes and wires connected him to various machines that beeped and hummed. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and Bull could see the bandages beneath the hospital gown. He pulled a chair up beside the bed and took his son's hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Hey, kid," Bull whispered, his voice cracking. "You scared the hell out of me." Jake's eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Bull sat there in the quiet room, listening to the machines, holding his son's hand and thinking about the homeless boy who was somewhere out in the rain, alone and scared, the kid Jake had risked everything to protect. Bull didn't sleep that night. He sat vigil beside Jake's bed, occasionally stepping out to update his brothers who had maintained their presence in the waiting room. Wrench brought him coffee and a sandwich from the vending machine. Manny offered to take shifts so Bull could rest, but Bull refused. He wasn't leaving his son. Around 3 in the morning, Jake's eyes finally opened. He looked disoriented, his gaze unfocused, until he found Bull's face. "Dad?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Right here, son. Don't try to talk. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay." Jake's brow furrowed. And Bull could see him trying to piece together what had happened. The kid, Eli. Is he okay? Eli? The homeless kid. Those guys were going to hurt him. Is he safe? Bull squeezed Jake's hand. He ran. The police are looking for him. You saved his life, Jake. You took those bullets for him. Jake's eyes filled with tears. He was so scared, Dad. He's just a little kid. They wanted his money, the few dollars he had from panhandling. When I told them to leave him alone, they pulled the gun. I couldn't let them hurt him. Bull felt his own eyes burning. You did good, son. You did real good. But you also scared me half to death. Jake managed a weak smile before his eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling him back under. Bull settled back in his chair, but Jake's words stayed with him. Eli. A name for the boy now. And Jake had known him, at least enough to learn his name and to care what happened to him. Over the next 2 days, Jake's condition slowly improved. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, talking about the miracle of the bullets missing vital organs, about Jake's youth and strength working in his favor. The Iron Saints maintained their vigil, taking turns keeping Bull company, bringing food and running interference with the hospital staff who weren't used to having a motorcycle club camped out in their waiting room. On the 3rd day, Detective Hayes returned with an update. She found Bull in the hospital cafeteria, nursing his 4th cup of coffee of the morning. Mr. Henderson, we found Eli. Bull looked up sharply. Where? Railroad yard, sleeping in an abandoned boxcar. He's 11 years old, no parents, been on the streets for about 6 months. His mother died of an overdose, and he's been bouncing between foster homes and the streets ever since. He's terrified we're going to put him back in the system. Where is he now? Child Protective Services has temporary custody. But he keeps asking about Jake, wants to know if he's alive, if he's okay. The kid blames himself for what happened. Bull stood up. Can I see him? Hayes hesitated. He's not family. My son took 3 bullets for him. That makes him family. Where is he? The detective studied Bull for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me. They took the elevator down to the 1st floor, to a smaller waiting area used by social services. Eli sat in a chair that was too big for him, drowning in a donated sweatshirt, his legs dangling above the floor. He had shaggy brown hair and dark eyes that looked too old for his face, the kind of eyes that had seen too much too soon. When he saw Bull approaching, those eyes went wide with fear. Bull crouched down in front of him, making himself smaller, less intimidating. Hey, Eli, my name's Bull. Jake's my son. Eli's chin trembled. Is he dead? Did I get him killed? No, son. He's alive. He's upstairs recovering. He's going to be okay. The relief that washed over Eli's face was so profound that Bull felt it in his own chest. The boy started crying, quiet sobs that shook his thin shoulders. Bull, acting on instinct, pulled the kid into a hug. Eli stiffened at first, then collapsed against Bull's chest, crying harder. It's my fault, Eli gasped between sobs. Those guys always mess with me. Jake told them to stop. He stood in front of me when they pulled the gun. He shouldn't have done that. I'm nobody. Bull held the boy tighter. You listen to me, Eli. You're not nobody. And Jake did exactly what he was supposed to do. He helped someone who needed help. That's what we do. That's who we are. A social worker approached, a woman in her 30s with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression. Mr. Henderson, I'm afraid visiting hours for minors in custody are limited. Bull looked up at her, still holding Eli. This boy's been through hell. He needs to see Jake. He needs to know my son's okay. Can you arrange that? The social worker looked at Detective Hayes, who nodded. I think we can make an exception, just for a few minutes. They took Eli up to Jake's room. By now, Jake was awake and sitting up slightly, still pale but alert. When Eli walked through the door, Jake's face lit up. Eli! Man, I was worried about you. Eli stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the bandages, the machines, the evidence of what his existence had cost. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "For what? You didn't shoot me. Come here." Eli approached the bed slowly, like he might break something. Jake held out his hand and Eli took it. "You saved my life," Eli said. "You would have done the same for me." "No, I wouldn't have. I would have run. I'm a coward." Jake shook his head. "You survived 6 months on the streets at 11 years old. You're not a coward. You're one of the toughest people I know." Bull watched the exchange from the doorway, his heart full of pride for his son and aching for this kid who had no one. The social worker gave them 10 minutes before she gently reminded them that Eli needed to return to the temporary foster placement. As they led Eli away, the boy looked back at Jake with an expression of pure devastation, like he was losing the only person who had ever cared about him. Bull saw it, and something inside him shifted, settled into place with a certainty he hadn't felt since Sarah died. That night, after Jake had fallen asleep, Bull made some calls, first to his lawyer, then to Child Protective Services, then to every member of the Iron Saints who might have connections or pull in the system. By morning, he had started the process of becoming Eli's emergency foster parent with the intention of pursuing adoption. The social worker assigned to Eli's case, a veteran named Margaret Chen, who had seen everything in her 20 years with CPS, met with Bull in a conference room at the hospital. "Mr. Henderson, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you need to understand the reality here. You're a single parent with a teenage son who's currently recovering from gunshot wounds. You're a member of a motorcycle club. The court is going to have concerns." Bull met her gaze steadily. "My son almost died saving that kid. Eli has nobody. He's been failed by the system over and over. I'm not going to fail him." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "You understand this isn't temporary. If you start this process, you're committing to being this child's parent, potentially for the next 7 years until he's 18. That's a massive responsibility." "I understand. I raised Jake on my own after my wife died. I know what I'm signing up for." "The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. Are they a criminal organization?" "We're a brotherhood. We help people on the road, raise money for veteran causes, and run a legitimate auto repair business. We're not criminals." Margaret made notes on her tablet. "I'll need to do a home visit, background checks, references, and we'll need to see how Eli responds to the idea. He's been in 4 foster homes in 6 months. He doesn't trust adults easily. Let me talk to him." It took 2 days to arrange another meeting, this time in a family room at the CPS office. Eli sat on a couch, picking at a loose thread on his borrowed jeans. When Bull entered, the boy looked up warily. Bull sat down across from him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Eli, I want to talk to you about something important. I know you've been bounced around a lot, and I know you don't have much reason to trust people, but I want to offer you something different." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Like what?" "A home with me and Jake, permanent if you want it." The boy's expression didn't change, but Bull saw his hands clench into fists. "Why?" "Because my son cares about you. Because you deserve better than sleeping in boxcars and running from people who want to hurt you. Because I have room in my life and in my house for one more. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's family." Eli stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I'm not good at family. I mess things up. That's why my foster placements never work." Bull stood too, but kept his distance. "Jake told me you've been on your own since your mom died. That you've been surviving by your wits and your courage. That takes strength, Eli, but you don't have to be alone anymore. You don't have to fight everything by yourself. What if I screw it up? What if you decide I'm too much trouble? Then we figure it out together. That's what families do. They stick through the hard stuff." Eli turned from the window, and Bull could see the war happening behind those old eyes. the desperate want battling against years of disappointment and abandonment. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." But 3 days later, Margaret Chen called Bull with news. "Eli asked if he could come stay with you. We're going to start with emergency foster placement while we process the adoption paperwork. You'll need to complete parenting classes, maintain regular check-ins, and pass all our evaluations. But if everything goes well, we can move forward." Bull called the Iron Saints together that night at the clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Flagstaff. 20 members showed up, filling the main room with leather and denim and the smell of motor oil. Bull stood at the front, near the bar, and told them what was happening. "This kid saved my son's life by just being someone worth saving," Bull said. "And Jake saved his life by stepping up when someone needed help. Now I'm asking you all to help me give Eli a real shot. He's going to need more than just me. He's going to need a family, a community. Can I count on you?" Wrench stood up first. "That kid's an Iron Saint as far as I'm concerned. We take care of our own." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Manny volunteered to help set up a bedroom at Bull's house. Tommy offered to teach Eli about motorcycles, to give him something constructive to focus on. Others promised to be there for whatever the kid needed, tutoring, sports, just someone to talk to. Jake was released from the hospital a week later, still weak but healing. Bull brought him home to the small 3-bedroom house in Sedona, where the spare room had been transformed. The Iron Saints had painted the walls, assembled new furniture, and filled the closet with clothes in Eli's size. They'd even put up shelves and stocked them with books and art supplies, things Margaret had mentioned Eli liked. The day Eli arrived, Bull and Jake waited on the front porch. Margaret's car pulled up, and Eli climbed out slowly, carrying a small backpack that contained everything he owned. He stared at the house, at the desert landscape beyond, at Bull and Jake standing side by side. "Welcome home, son," Bull said. Eli walked up the porch steps, and Jake pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of his own healing wounds. Bull wrapped his arms around both boys, and for the first time in a long time, his house felt complete. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Eli was used to fending for himself, to taking care of his own needs, to not trusting that adults would follow through on their promises. He hoarded food in his room until Bull gently explained that there would always be enough, that he didn't need to hide meals anymore. He flinched at loud noises and unexpected movements, trauma responses from his time on the streets. He had nightmares that sent him wandering the house at 2 a.m, unable to sleep. But slowly, carefully, trust began to build. Jake taught Eli how to throw a football in the backyard. Bull showed him how to change oil on a motorcycle, his hands guiding Eli's smaller ones through the process. The Iron Saints included him in their community barbecues and charity rides, treating him like he'd always been part of the family. School was harder. Eli had missed significant time, and his education had been sporadic at best. Bull hired a tutor, and Jake spent hours helping with homework. The 2 boys bent over textbooks at the kitchen table. There were fights, too. Moments when Eli lashed out, testing boundaries, waiting for Bull to give up on him like everyone else had. But Bull never did. 3 months after Eli moved in, on a cold January evening, Bull found him sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. Bull grabbed 2 sodas from the fridge and joined him. "You okay, kid?" Eli nodded slowly. "I was just thinking about my mom. She wasn't a bad person, you know. She just couldn't beat the drugs. She tried. I'm sure she did. And I'm sure she loved you. Do you think she'd be okay with this? With me being here?" Bull considered the question carefully. "I think any mother would want her child to be safe, to be loved, to have a future. So yeah, I think she'd be okay with it. I think she'd be grateful you found your way here." Eli wiped his eyes. "Jake could have died because of me. I still have nightmares about it." Jake made his choice. He saw someone who needed help, and he stepped up. That's what good people do. And now you get to make choices too. You get to decide what kind of person you want to be, what kind of life you want to build. You're not defined by where you came from or what happened to you. You get to write your own story from here. Eli looked at Bull, really looked at him, and something in his expression softened. "Can I call you Dad?" Bull felt his throat tighten. "I'd be honored." The adoption was finalized in April, on a warm spring day with wildflowers blooming across the desert. The courtroom was packed with iron saints, their leather vests a stark contrast to the formal setting. Judge Martinez, a stern woman in her 60s who had seen countless cases, smiled as she signed the papers. "Mr. Henderson, Eli, congratulations. You are now officially family in the eyes of the law." The Iron Saints erupted in cheers, and Eli, who had been nervous and quiet all morning, finally smiled. Bull pulled him into a hug, and Jake joined them, the three of them holding on to each other while their families celebrated around them. Outside the courthouse, a local news crew was waiting. The story of the biker's son who took 3 bullets for a homeless kid had captured the community's attention, and now they wanted to cover the adoption. Bull initially wanted to refuse, but Eli surprised him by agreeing to a brief interview. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Tran, positioned them on the courthouse steps. "Eli, how does it feel to be officially adopted?" Eli looked at the camera, then at Bull and Jake standing beside him. "It feels like I finally found where I belong, like I'm not alone anymore." "And Bull, what made you decide to adopt Eli?" Bull put his hand on Eli's shoulder. "My son showed me what real courage looks like when he stepped in front of those bullets. This kid showed me what real resilience looks like by surviving when the world gave him every reason to give up. They both taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing each other, about love. Eli chose to trust us, and we chose him right back." The segment aired that evening on the local news and was picked up by several national outlets. Messages poured in from across the country, from other motorcycle clubs, from foster families, from people who had been touched by the story of second chances and unlikely heroes. But for Bull, Jake, and Eli, the real story was happening at home. In the quiet moments that the cameras didn't capture, it was Eli sleeping through the night without nightmares for the first time. It was Jake teaching Eli to ride a dirt bike in the desert, both boys laughing as Eli wobbled and found his balance. It was Sunday morning pancakes in the kitchen, Eli standing on a step stool to help flip them, while Bull supervised and Jake set the table. Eli started therapy to process his trauma, both from his mother's death and his time on the streets. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, days when the weight of everything felt too heavy. But he had something now that he'd never had before. A support system that wouldn't give up on him, people who had chosen him deliberately and completely. Jake, recovered from his injuries, returned to school and became something of a local hero. He downplayed it, uncomfortable with the attention, but his actions had inspired other students to get involved in community service. He started volunteering at a homeless shelter, and Eli often joined him, the two brothers working side by side to help people like Eli had once been. The Iron Saints embraced their new role as Eli's extended family. Wrench taught him basic mechanics. Manny, who had a surprising talent for art, helped Eli develop his drawing skills. The club's president, a man named Diesel who rarely showed his softer side, became Eli's biggest champion, showing up to his school events and parent-teacher conferences alongside Bull. 1 year after the shooting, on an October evening that felt eerily similar to that fateful night, Bull organized a small gathering at the house. He invited the detectives who had worked the case, Margaret Chen from CPS, and the trauma surgeon who had saved Jake's life. The Iron Saints were there too, along with some of Eli's new friends from school. Bull stood on the back porch, looking out at the gathering. Jake was showing some of his classmates his motorcycle, still not allowed to ride it yet, but soon. Eli was laughing at something Manny had said, his whole face lit up with genuine joy. The transformation in the boy over the past year was remarkable. He'd gained weight, grown 3 inches, and lost that haunted look in his eyes. Margaret Chen joined Bull on the porch, holding a glass of lemonade. "You know, when you first approached me about fostering Eli, I had my doubts. I've seen too many placements fail, especially with kids who have experienced the kind of trauma he has. But you proved me wrong. What you've built here, this is exactly what the system is supposed to do, but so rarely achieves. You gave him stability, love, and a future. More than that, you gave him belonging." Bull watched Eli throw his head back in laughter. "He gave us something too. He gave Jake a brother and me a second son. He reminded me that there's always room for one more person at the table, one more heart in the family." The party continued into the evening, and as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bull gathered everyone together. He raised his glass, and the crowd quieted. "A year ago, my son almost died protecting someone he barely knew. That night changed all of our lives in ways we couldn't have imagined. Jake, you showed extraordinary courage. Eli, you showed extraordinary strength, and everyone here, you showed extraordinary love by welcoming Eli into this community, into this family, to second chances, to found family, and to the kind of love that chooses to show up day after day, no matter what." The gathering echoed his toast, glasses clinking. Jake and Eli stood side by side, and Bull saw them exchange a look, the kind of wordless communication that only siblings share. They had both been forever changed by those 3 bullets, by a split-second decision that had rippled out into something beautiful and lasting. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Bull found Eli in his room, sitting on his bed with a photo album. It was new, filled with pictures from the past year. Eli's first day at his new school, family dinners, motorcycle rides, holidays, ordinary moments that had become precious. "Can't sleep?" Bull asked from the doorway. Eli shook his head. "Just thinking, a year ago I was sleeping in a boxcar, wondering if I'd make it through winter. Now I'm here, with you and Jake, with a family. Sometimes it doesn't feel real." Bull sat down beside him, looking at the photos. "It's real, son. This is your life now, your real life." Eli leaned against Bull's shoulder. "I know Jake says he doesn't regret it, taking those bullets, but sometimes I feel guilty that it happened because of me." "Listen to me, Eli. What happened that night was the result of violent kids making violent choices. It wasn't your fault. But what came after all of this, that's the result of good people making good choices. Jake chose to help. I chose to open my home. You chose to trust us. That's what matters. Not the bullets, but what we built after them." "I want to make you proud," Eli whispered. "You already do. Every single day." They sat together in comfortable silence, looking at the evidence of a year of healing, growth, and love. Outside, Bull could hear the distant rumble of a motorcycle on the highway, that familiar sound that had been the soundtrack to his life for decades. But now it meant something different. It wasn't just about the road or the brotherhood or the freedom of the ride. It was about coming home to people who mattered, to a family that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Jake appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. "You guys okay?" "Yeah," Eli said, smiling. "We're good." Jake joined them on the bed, and the 3 of them sat there together looking at the photo album, remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. Bull put his arms around both boys, his sons, and felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. The shooting had left scars, physical ones on Jake's chest and emotional ones on all of them. But scars were just evidence of healing, proof that something broken had been made whole again. Jake would carry the marks of those bullets for the rest of his life, but he would also carry the knowledge that his courage had saved a life and created a family. Eli would carry the memories of his mother, of survival, of loneliness, but he would also carry the certainty that he was loved, chosen, and valued. Bull would carry the fear of almost losing his son, but he would also carry the joy of gaining another. As the three of them sat together in the quiet house, surrounded by evidence of their new life, Bull thought about the mystery of how broken pieces could fit together to create something stronger than the original parts. How 3 bullets, meant to destroy, had instead led to creation, to connection, to love. "I love you both," Bull said, the words feeling both familiar and new. "More than you'll ever know." "We know, Dad," Jake said, and Eli echoed him. "We love you too." Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like promises. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling, other kids were alone, other families were being torn apart. But here, in this small house in Sedona, 3 people who had found each other against all odds were whole. The Iron Saints would continue to ride the highways, helping stranded travelers and broken-down families. Jake would heal completely, the bullets that had torn through his chest becoming just a story he would tell his own children someday. Eli would graduate high school, then college, carrying the lessons of resilience and love into whatever future he chose. But the foundation of it all, the moment that changed everything, would always be those 3 bullets and the choice a 17-year-old boy made to step in front of them. Not because he had to, but because someone needed help. And helping was what his father had taught him to do. Bull squeezed his sons tighter, grateful for every moment, every choice, every twist of fate that had brought them together. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and struggles. But they would face them together as a family, bound not by blood alone, but by something deeper and more enduring. Love, choice, courage, brotherhood, and the unshakable belief that everyone, no matter where they came from or what they'd been through, deserved a chance at belonging, at home, at family. The 3 bullets had nearly ended a life. Instead, they had created 3 lives worth living, intertwined and unbreakable, and that was the real miracle.